Before we start talking about all the tech horror, I wanted to mention that I am now again on TikTok. Consistently now. I think I'm going to stay on TikTok. So if you want some like shorter form horror content, you can follow me over on there. I'll probably dabble in the book talk stuff too. So if you're into books and things, you can follow me over there. I don't know what I'm really doing over there right now, but most of it is horror content. So I just thought I'd mention it to you guys that I'm doing more horror content over on TikTok now. Okay, so for today's video, we're going to be talking about the top 10 tech horror movies, or digital internet-based, technology-based horror movies. Now, this is kind of more specific to a certain era of horror, right? As you might be able to tell which one. Thought I'd dress a little on theme today. So it is a little bit specific to late 90s, early 2000s, and mid 2000s, 2010s also. As technology is advancing, I feel like horror directors and writers and whatnot are taking advantage of this hold that technology really has on us and making it terrifying, which I think is genius. Obviously, I love tech horror. I love any movie that revolves around technology, especially older technology that's more nostalgic for me. So, you know, a lot of these are early 2000s, I'm not gonna lie. Now, of course, there is tech horror, technical tech horror from earlier decades as well, like the 80s. We have From Beyond and The Fly, maybe even They Live is a little technology based as well with the sunglasses. But I'm talking more about modern technology with phones and, you know, webcams and laptops and the internet and things like that. So let's start with the most modern tech horror movie on this list, and that is Host. This you can find on Shudder. 6 friends host a Zoom party where they hire a medium to perform a seance, but things quickly go wrong and they start noticing strange occurrences happening in their homes. Now, the budget for this movie was only $35,000 and it was filmed entirely on Zoom during the pandemic. So it's very referential to the situation that all of us were in 2020. It probably will become one of those dated pandemic horror movies. We got a handful of them as we were in the pandemic, which I don't blame horror creators at all to take advantage of the horrors that we have going on in the real world sometimes, if it's appropriate, obviously. But I do find pandemic horror movies, especially since we are living through one, very interesting and topical. Obviously, this takes place on Zoom. They're taking advantage of their free trial on Zoom. I didn't even know that was a thing. I've never used Zoom in my life. But I love how this was filmed. I really love low budget tech horror movies like this because they have to rely on other things than high budget graphics and gore or body horror, anything like that. They have to be really effective in the performances and the atmosphere and the tension building. And Host was actually mostly improvised. It was a scripted movie, but a lot of the script was actually held back from the actors so they would have genuine reactions. And some of the lines were indeed improvised. This movie runs at only 50 minutes. So it's a very, very short watch, which I think is also because Zoom's free trial only allows an hour of utilizing the, you know, video feature, I guess. So I think that's very funny that they made the movie within that time frame of Zoom, so it just feels even more like realistic. Next up, we have one that I recently rewatched and fell even more in love with. This is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but oh my god, I love it, and that is Stay Alive. A group of friends decide to play a horror game that has never been released to the public before. However, it soon becomes a terrifying reality when they discover each time a character dies in the game, the player also dies. This is apparently Disney's only slasher film, but I'm not sure if that stays true today because this came out in 2006. So I don't know if that's really accurate now that Disney has bought pretty much everything. So you let me know if that is still accurate. Stay Alive is just one of those movies that is very nostalgic. They reference Silent Hill video games. If you're a gamer at all, you'll really enjoy all the references from the early 2000s in this movie. Now, this was meant to get an R rating because when you watch it, it does feel edited in order to get a PG-13 rating because the studio insisted that they do edit a lot of things out, cut a lot of things out so they could pass a PG-13 rating. However, the filmmakers did release a director's cut with the 15 minutes of edited out footage included, so it's more R-rated in that sense. I love a good PG-13 movie, so it really doesn't bother me, but there is that director's cut if you want a little bit more. If you like Final Destination, specifically the third one, which also came out in 2006, you would love this movie. It is very reminiscent of it to me. The way that they're investigating how each other dies in the game is very similar to how they're looking at the photos taken at the carnival in Final Destination 3. So definitely recommend checking checking this out if you're a fan of that. Next up, we have another one that I've talked about a little bit on this channel, you might remember, is FEARDOTCOM. A New York detective investigates the strange deaths of victims who seem to die exactly 48 hours after logging onto the site FEAR.com. This may be technically the worst one in this list because it has a very, very low rating online. It is probably the worst one and the one that most of you are not going to like, but for those of you who will like it, I think you'll really love it. It's so cheesy. Like, some of the lines are delivered like a CSI episode. It is hilarious at times, and it's not meant to be, but it's just, I don't know, entertaining in that sense. Now, at the time when this was released, because it was released in 2002, a lot of people compared it to that of The Ring, which also came out in 2002. However, Fear.com came out theatrically 2 months prior to The Ring. So I don't know if it was inspired by one or the other. Obviously, though, there is Ringu, someone correct me on that. I think it's Ringu. Obviously came out before Fear.com, so they could have been inspired by the original Japanese one. Who knows? Anyway, definitely check it out. It's just entertaining. That's all I have to say. If you like the old internet vibe, aesthetics, this is for you. Next, we have One Missed Call, the Japanese original one from 2003. This follows a girl whose friend receives a voicemail from herself ending in a death scream. When she turns up dead and her friends start dying around her, she realizes it's a vengeful spirit sending the disturbing messages and videos. I don't think the remake is as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. I enjoy the remake, but I'm specifically recommending the original because I do like it so much more. I absolutely love all of the horror elements within this and the remake for that matter. I feel like they, changed enough up in the remake to make it more modernly scary. I don't know. It's different, kind of different vibes in each movie, but I really like the horror elements in each, and I really think it's the overall concept of receiving a voicemail, hearing your own death. I just love the horror of that. But I think specifically it was such a genius idea for the time and the era that it took place in 2003, when cell phones were gradually becoming more and more popular. I think it made a lot of people afraid of their phones for probably the first time they ever thought about anything like that. So they really took advantage of the more modern technology and put it into this movie to make it horrifying, which maybe that translates to it not aging super well today, but if you were around in the early 2000s for that technology, obviously you'd enjoy it. Now, One Missed Call was very, very heavily inspired by a lot of other J horror movies, such as Ringu, Pulse, Dark Water, Ju-on, and I think you can really see all of that inspiration really come through in this movie with different elements. Next up, we have one that I have beaten into the ground talking about on this channel because I am such a fan of this movie, and it's just one of those that I'll never stop talking about if I ever have an opportunity to talk about it, and that is Unfriended. Friends join a group chat session and realize there is an unfamiliar user in their chat room. Thinking it's just a glitch, they try to carry on their conversation when they suddenly become haunted by a classmate from their past. Like I said, I've talked about this so many times. You know about Unfriended. You know it's good, hopefully. Some of you don't like it. I do not like Unfriended Dark Web, though. That changes the game completely, changes too many things about the overall concept of why the first one was so good. But Unfriended is just one of those lower budget, filmed entirely on webcams, that is just so effective with its horror, and all of the delivery from the actors and everything is just very believable to me. Even though a lot of people still talk about Unfriended to this day, myself included, I still believe it's a little bit underrated. Up next, we have Pulse. This follows a psychology student after her boyfriend commits suicide, and she and her friends begin receiving strange emails and video messages. She teams up with a computer hacker to shut down the deadly force. Now, this is, of course, the remake. There is the Japanese original as well, but I'm specifically recommending the remake because it's so nostalgic for me, and I just rewatched this the other day again. It is just so good. Like, I can't fault it. I was literally grinning while I was watching this movie because of the nostalgia. I just think that J-horror and all of its originals that inspired the remakes as well, combined with tech horror, is just one of my favorite specific subgenres of the horror genre, like J-tech horror. that's just a genius combination. I think Japanese horror movies are so fantastic. I will be doing a whole video on my favorite foreign horror movies, so be on the lookout for that, hopefully this month. But of course, check out the original Pulse as well, but I had to talk about the remake specifically because I love that movie so much. I think it's genuinely terrifying. And I know not everyone's going to think that, but it is still to this day scary. I was watching it while I was on my treadmill, and I was still a little freaked out, not gonna lie. It was middle of the day, had my blinds open, TV on, with my treadmill in front of it, and I was still like, oh. Critics rate these movies very, very low. I don't know what it is about them. I guess it's the cheesiness. They all kind of follow a similar recipe in their horror movies, but for me, it just works. It just works. Next up, we have The Den. This follows a woman who is studying the habits of webcam users from the safety of her home when her life begins spinning out of control after witnessing a murder. This is another movie that primarily takes place within webcams, laptops, phones, cameras, things like that. And I do think it is a little bit more underrated than maybe Host or Unfriended. I just don't think enough people talk about The Den. It is genuinely really good. Not as scary, I would say. It's a little bit less horrifying. I find the supernatural tech horrors like Pulse and whatnot to be a little bit more terrifying than the more realistic stalkery ones like The Den. If you've ever played that game, Take This Lollipop, you might see a familiar face in The Den, which might add a whole other layer of horror for you. Next, we have a more modern tech horror movie in Cam. This follows a cam girl with strict guidelines for her shows when one day she realizes she's been replaced on her account by an exact lookalike. This movie is very much more like Black Mirror vibes, I would say. It's very eerie. The writer Isa Mazzei actually drew upon her own experiences as a webcam model, and she was very inspired by the movies Whiplash and Black Swan because their protagonists are very like obsessive and determined people, so she wanted to write her protagonist like that. Also, she was very inspired by Videodrome by David Cronenberg because he does not use gratuitous body horror. It always has a place and a theme for why he's using it, which I think is very smart, and it really comes through in Cam. And I think Cam, people stopped talking about Cam, but I'm going to bring it back up again because I really liked it. A lot of people talked about it when it came out in 2018, of course, but I'm bringing it up again in case you have not yet watched it. Next, I could not make this list without the one and only VHS franchise. That's right, all 4 VHS movies. You can see where they're all streaming down here. They're all pretty much on TUBI, and the last one on SHUDDER, so you can find them anywhere. These found footage anthology movies revolve around someone finding disturbing tapes, and each story is linked together by a frame narrative. Now, some of these segments are better than others, and I will be doing an entire tier list or ranking video, I guess, of all of the VHS segments. That's been requested so many times, so expect that. But there is something for everyone within this franchise. There's so many shorts, so many segments that you're going to like at least a couple of them. I really love this franchise. It can be highly disturbing to me. I don't know what it is about the found footage vibe of these movies that makes it feel very realistic. I feel like the horror in this is very effective. So obviously if you have not watched them yet, watch it. Also, the new one is fantastic. I absolutely love the new one. It has some of my favorite segments of all time in that, but I would love to hear what your favorites are. So the last tech horror we're going to talk about in today's video is one that is going to be a controversial choice. You might be thinking The Ring belongs in this video somehow because obviously it's my favorite movie of all time. Today we're talking about Rings. Yeah, the new one. This follows a woman who is worried about her boyfriend who left for college. She tracks him down and realizes he has gotten involved in a strange group surrounding a mysterious computer file that kills the watcher after 7 days. I know what you're thinking. This is another one that is also on a technical level bad. Very low ratings. A lot of people don't like this one. Given that it's my favorite franchise, I don't know if that makes it more or less understandable that I love Rings, you know, because the first one's my favorite of all time, so this one isn't as strong, of course. But a lot of people hate on this movie, and I don't really understand. I know the storyline's a little bit convoluted when it fits into the big picture of Samara Morgan and the entire storyline of the originals, but I really enjoyed this movie. There's something about it. I just love the visuals, all of the horror effects. I also love the more modern technology included in Rings because we have now it being a computer file versus a VHS tape, which is why I'm including it over The Ring. The Ring is technically a tech horror because it's VHS, but I wanted to include more modern horror technology in this video. But I love the updates, I really do. I don't mind the story, I don't think it's that bad, and I love seeing more of Samara. Anytime I can get that, I will take it. So there you have my top 10 personal tech horror movies. Let me know if I'm missing any or if there are any others I should check out, especially from the early 2000s, late 90s, mid 2000s era, because I just feel like that tech horror is just my favorite kind. But please let me know your favorite tech horror movies down below in the comments. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.